Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be reviewing the magnificently written On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This is a book that I read not so long ago. I read it quite fast. I think it only took me a couple of days. I loved it. However, there are a couple of things about this book that just didn't quite do it for me, and I'll explain what it is. Though I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not quite sure if my criticism really holds water or not, so I'd be interested to know what you think if you read the book. But if you haven't, this review is going to be spoiler free, even though in this case I really don't think it matters. So what is it about? On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous is actually a letter written from the narrator named Little Dog to his mother who cannot read, and it tells the story of his life growing up as a gay Vietnamese migrant in America. Also touches upon the experiences of his mother and grandmother, which are quite different because he has grown up in America and they came from Vietnam. It does offer a lot of insight on the situation of the Vietnamese people at a time that was very difficult for them, obviously, concerning the Vietnam War and trying to adjust to this new country that really they know very little about, and that can often feel like it is rigged against them. This book by Ocean Vuong is kind of like, it is referred to as a novel, like it is nominally a novel, but I view it almost more as an experiment, something like a mix between, you know, poetic stream of consciousness and memoir. And I loved it, but I wouldn't refer to this as a novel, to be very honest with you. I'll explain, but like bear with me for a bit, okay? There are a lot of things that I absolutely loved about this book. I mean, quite apart from the writing, really. It covers a lot of very interesting themes, and it is obvious that Vuong is an exceptional poet because that's what he's known for. He is a poet. This is a debut novel. He has a striking command of language. I mean, I was so impressed. The language and the way that Vuong uses it is what I loved most about this novel. It's what made me want to read on. Every single sentence in this book was beautifully crafted, whether it was a description, a metaphor, or simply muddled up words. The way Vuong plays with languages is so beautiful and sometimes funny. I distinctly remember there was this one quote in this book where, you know, he describes to his mother what it's like to be a writer, and he says, "Oh, I'm not making this up, I'm making this down." And there are quite a few quotes like this that I really enjoyed, and the way he takes a lot of liberty with the way the English language works is something that I thoroughly enjoyed, and he uses it for such vivid descriptions, beautiful comparisons and metaphors. This book is just so beautiful, combined with the powerful themes brought up by Ocean Vuong. I mean, it was breathtaking. I'm probably never gonna forget the way this was written. The narrator talks about his struggle with masculinity. Obviously, being a gay man is not the easiest thing to be dealing with. He talks about his kind of chaotic, unstable, at times rather toxic relationship with his mother, and their attempts to conform to American society and all the expectations that they have placed on them. And I thought that these were all incredibly important topics to be reading about. It really opened my eyes to the reality that a lot of immigrants faced, and it was a very sad read. There were a few happy moments, but overall, emotionally, it was actually quite tough. And I feel that for someone who would have had the same experiences as the narrator, it would be an even more emotionally taxing book to read. I'm sure that this book actually appealed to a huge number of people because of this. And even me, who, you know, I don't think I could be more different from Ocean Vuong and the narrator if I tried. There was still a lot of things that I found that I could relate to, partly because I've moved to so many different countries. That is one of the reasons, but also my moving experience has been very different. I come from a very privileged environment, and the way that I could relate to this had a lot more to do with my passion for literature and writing, for the way I view the world, the fact that I look at art in a certain way. That is something that I could really relate to in a big way. So I think that whoever you are, you might find something that strikes a chord within you. When it comes to the writing, like I said, it was beautiful and poetic, and there were some lines, some sentences, hell, even some paragraphs that were somewhat murky and unclear. And I had to like sit there and think about it for like a good 2 minutes, which doesn't seem like long, but when you're spending 2 minutes trying to figure out what an author means when he's written a certain line, it can seem annoying that it slows down the reading experience, but at the same time I was very grateful that, you know, I was made to take the time to reflect on a specific sentence, that I stopped, slowed down, took my time to think, rather than just rush through a book just so I could add it to the list of books that I read. I think that this was part of the magic of this book. Vuong, being a poet, wrote this novel like a poem. You can read this like a poem. Every line seems to hold meaning. Every line is beautifully crafted. I have a lot of love for Ocean Vuong's writing. I respect him a lot. But that being said, I did have an issue with his writing because, yes, while he is a fantastic writer, what about substance, right? What about plot? This is a novel, after all. Unfortunately, I don't think that Vuong is as naturally gifted at storytelling as he is at writing, which is a shame, because had both gone together for him, I think my experience would have been much more significant and different. Again, I feel like Vuong really had something going with this. I mean, it's, when you think about it, a letter to his mother who can't read, where he talks about his past trauma, his experience, all wrapped in beautiful lyrical writing. This is powerful. This is a wonderful idea for a novel. It's a wonderful premise. However, I think that execution could have been better. And like I said, I don't think that his storytelling matches his prose. Of course, one can argue that a compelling story isn't necessary for a good book, and I totally agree with that. But in that case, don't market it as a novel. Do you see what I mean? It reads like a fragmented, puzzle-like memoir, a somewhat confusing stream of consciousness narration, which can add to the charm of the book. That is part of the pleasure of reading these kinds of texts. However, when it's not what you're expecting, it can be a little bit off-putting. If you expect a compelling, exciting story, a book that defines characters in sharp outlines and keeps you on your toes and wondering what happens next, I'm afraid you're going to be very disappointed. I think that when you go into this book, you need to be aware that this does not read like a novel at all. Because also, my main question here is, and I feel like this really would change my rating of this book, which I did rate 4 stars, by the way, is this narrator, Little Dog, who is he writing for? We know that the letter is to his mother. It is directed to his mother. However, his mother cannot read, and the letter was still written. So even though the letter is to her, it cannot be for her because she will never be able to read it. In my mind, it is either for the narrator himself or for the world, or perhaps both. But in that case, the approach taken should have been a little bit different. If it is for himself, then structurally, yeah, it does all make quite a lot of sense, because he really wouldn't have to give himself more insight on the characters and the events, because obviously they would all make sense to him. But in that case, don't market it as a novel, right? Don't market it as a story. There is no real plot. There is no real start, no real finish. The characters are vague outlines of what the narrator obviously knows, but to us as strangers, they are unclear, murky shapes and not much more. And with the exception of his mother and grandmother, this story would be aimed at someone who already knows his entire life, who already knows the characters, who already knows what events took place and when they took place. Structurally, if he were writing his letter, you know, for himself to kind of have this message of, I wish I could tell you all of this, but I can't, so I'm going to write it down, knowing that you'll never read it, knowing that you'll never have to be confronted with all this confusing mix of feelings that I'm going through, then yes, this makes a lot of sense. And if that had been marketed as this kind of fragmented memoir of a letter to his mother but written for himself, it would have been a 5 out of 5 stars. I would have gone into it knowing, sorry about the sirens, I would have gone into it knowing what was awaiting me, and I would have been mentally prepared to, you know, pick it apart and analyze it, and I wouldn't have expected to escape into a story. Now, if, as I suspect it is the case, given the way that it has been marketed, it is for the world, a book that was meant to be sent out into the world, that was meant to bring attention to these issues that are quite frankly underrepresented in literature, it should have been very different structurally, I think. If it was written as a way to show the world what struggles exist outside of their own narrow view, to show people what kind of environment some people like him grow up in. I'm not a fan of the execution because while this makes you think and reflect, it doesn't offer as much insight as I would expect from a novel with this kind of goal. I very much struggled to care about the vague story and the cast of characters. Time blends in a mass of confusing events. It really doesn't make much sense to me, and the narrator really doesn't engage or draw his reader in, which, you know, for better or for worse, is necessary when you are trying to bring attention to a certain topic, when you're trying to get your reader interested in something that they might not be familiar with. A reader that is bored with this story, who has no idea about these issues, will not suddenly develop an interest in it if they are bored by the story, in my opinion. For someone who is entirely ignorant on the subject matter of the story, it wouldn't work. I feel like this would only work in reinforcing people who are already very aware that these kinds of struggles exist, maybe broaden the minds of people who have already accepted certain, you know, unfair and unjust facts about society. But to the ignorant reader who is just picking it up because he thinks it's an interesting story, a perspective he maybe hasn't heard before, but is entirely new to this kind of concept, I don't think it would work on bringing something more to the table. So in a way, this feels a little empty and a little shallow, even though obviously it isn't. But I think you guys understand what I'm trying to say, though obviously this is all speculation. I obviously do not know how people have, you know, responded to this novel. The only reviews that I've seen are from people who are already acutely aware that these kinds of struggles exist, which I suspect is why they enjoyed it so much. I don't know how somebody who has no clear idea of, you know, the struggles that are faced by characters in this book would respond to it. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments what you think. Overall, I really enjoyed this book once I accepted it for what it was. I just had to switch from the mindset of, hey, let's get lost in a story and maybe get really emotionally invested and cry a bit, to oh, it's one of those books that I'm really gonna want to read for the writing and for the underlying themes, and more in an academic way, I guess, where, you know, I love reading that kind of stuff. I love picking apart books. It's just that I wasn't expecting to read this kind of stream of consciousness narrative. You know, after like 50 or so pages, I realized what it was and I was able to enjoy it for what it was. But if you haven't read this, please go into it knowing that you don't really get much of a story out of it. Unfortunately, I don't know how effective it would be to people who are looking to learn more about certain issues and who are really quite ignorant on the topic. I think that this is only truly evocative for people who are very, very knowledgeable on the fact that these struggles exist and who are trying to get more of a human and emotional insight into the struggles faced rather than an economical or societal one. I think that a lot of people who are socially aware when it comes to these things will be aware in the sense of these people are systemically discriminated against. So it quickly gets very political. This is a lot more emotional and it's very interesting, and I think that, you know, it's very important to know the facts. It's important to know how these people are oppressed, but I think that, you know, fact doesn't really go about emotion. I think that fact is what we know to be true and what helps us accept certain things, but emotion is really what is going to make us want to do something about it, right? So I really would recommend this to people, even though you might already know a lot about the struggles that immigrants face. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the book. Let me know if you've read it, what you think of it. I would love to know your thoughts. Overall, I loved it. I would recommend it. I hope you enjoyed the review. Thank you so much for watching. And, you know, if you like this channel and you're new, you can watch my last video over here. There's like a playlist or another video or something over here, I don't know. And you can subscribe to my channel if you would like to. I post book-related content, and oh yeah, and you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, but like, I don't recommend it. I never post shit on there. But yeah, until next time, I'll see you guys soon. Goodbye.